carefully curated and planned. So as a region, while we are abundantly endowed with natural resources, we still have multi-TCF finds of natural gas. We still have discoveries of oil. In responding to how we create a more sustainable future for the region, clean energy investments or carbon abatement projects for that matter need to come in hand. And at Energy Asia, what was surfaced is the degree of pragmatism will need to be reflected in delivering energy in a way that is affordable, secure, reliable, because it needs to still support economic activity and industrialization, but with an eye on the planet's climate health. We are also at the center of the region with an archipelago of more than 20,000 islands, hundreds of thousands of kilometers of coastline. We are the most prone to facing climate change challenges, and anywhere from flooding, anywhere from soil erosion, soil movement, we are at risk. And we do not want to have to contend with climate refugees year in, year out. So this balance in pursuing delivering energy security for the region needs to also address the dimension of cleaner energy, so we'll have a more sustainable future.
And one of the strong themes we noticed from Petronas this year is to focus or emphasis on collaborations, not just between the governments, cooperation, but also between borders, technologies, and even industries. Why is collaboration such a key focus for Petronas at Energy Asia?
In Energy Asia, one key observation, and indeed what we deliberately planned for, was to have cross-sectoral participation. You will not see this forum being dominated by only oil and gas players. You see power and utilities present. You see clean tech providers, financial institutions. We can't only think about collaboration from the lens of being within one industry. We have to make sure that the eventual energy system addresses the entire shift towards a lower carbon, if not a zero carbon system. This is why collaboration underpins the rallying call for Energy Asia, as we ask people to support the journey to deliver Asia's energy transition. We can't do this without having, as you mentioned, across borders, across sectors, across industries, the kind of cooperation levels unprecedented. A very good example and a proof point of this is what we've done with Vietnam, which has had an abundance of offshore wind. Malaysia is going to take that and also transport it through to Singapore. This requires not only the expertise from people like ourselves and Petro Vietnam for offshore construction, but also the stability of the grid. The expertise comes from national utilities, so we can serve markets in Singapore that really require them. But in doing this and emulating this, a lot of capital needs to flow into the region. I highlighted almost 90 trillion US dollars need. Our Prime Minister said just to upgrade the grid, we will need north of 43 billion ringgit, and TNB has to deploy this. But this is capital that's sorely needed to support the demand I just mentioned earlier.
And definitely this is an amazing journey for Petronas, and amidst all the strategic dialogue, partnerships and even vision sharing at Energy Asia, let's bring it home, Tan Sri. What does it mean for all of us, especially for Malaysia?
For Malaysia, particularly given our role this year, and I don't want to speak out of turn, our Prime Minister has played a pivotal role with Malaysia being the chair for ASEAN. We stand at a unique cusp of a period where unprecedented levels of understanding and collaboration can be enabled. ASEAN has enjoyed very long periods without conflict. ASEAN has collectively, even though it's at different paces and people have different starting points, all heading towards mass urbanization, more industrialization, and everyone pursuing their own dimension and version of the fifth industrial revolution. In order to service all this, I think the only way to actually ensure, and we had an opening montage which demonstrated that even though as the region had an abundance of resources, be it depleting or renewable, long coastlines, abundant solar irradiance, however, demand centers and where this can be found are two different places. And we have to make sure there is reach, there is inclusivity, and this fits well with what ASEAN wants to deliver, sustainability and inclusivity.
sustainability and inclusivity, it's one of the objectives that we want to bring forward so we can lead the conversation moving forward, and how can we shape the future of Energy Asia. And over the past few days at Energy Asia, definitely a lot of delegation, almost around 4,000 with 52 sponsors, corporate sponsors, and then we have almost 180 speakers internationally. And some of the regional leaders also highlighted the complexity they face. One of the challenges that Asia face, from navigating or accelerating the clean energy transition to navigating uncertainty to geopolitical tensions. Specifically for Petronas, how does Petronas transformation plan to address directly to all of these realities across Asia?
Much like any other investor within the energy space, and pretty much any investor in general, what you're looking for is policy coherence. What you're looking for is the right amount of return for the right amount of risk so that capital can be deployed. At the sidelines of Energy Asia, there was a caucusing of many energy leaders in a forum we called Eagle. And there was a very good, transparent, open and candid conversation around why this is not happening enough. There is a disproportionate, and you refer to ASEAN, there's a disproportionate amount of spend for renewable and clean tech if we strip out China. If we strip out China, ASEAN maybe enjoys at best up to only 15% of the kind of shift in energy transition spending. And we have this dimension to contend with, because policy does not start equally for everyone in ASEAN. We've got people with less mature economies, and we are looking at a phenomena where we have people earning US $2,000 GDP per capita, all the way up to 93,000. So the policy responses, the carrot and sticks, the incentives that we deal with are different. But what we can work together with many of our contemporaries is, even in delivering the conventional sources of energy, we can commit to make sure that this is delivered cleaner with less emissions. Very good example, Petronas has worked towards getting gold certification under OGMP, the methane principles. We are avoiding zero routine flaring and venting, so that even as we deliver energy today, it's cleaner with existing systems. While that's being done, Petronas is taking the steps, as you know, having a clean energy vehicle like Gentari, delivering clean energy solutions through renewables, a target of at least 20 gigawatts, and of course, green hydrogen, and promoting green mobility.
From small plan to big plans, from short-term to long-term planning, how will Petronas accelerate its growth moving forward?
This is the challenge. We are in a period, and I think you've heard this term before because Petronas is now using it a little bit more liberally. It's polycrisis. We are going through a period of change which has grown in frequency, grown in scale of disruption, and I think we cannot do an about face. When we take on capital decisions, we take on capital decisions with an investment horizon that goes beyond any government administration period or elected government's period. We have to make sure that we serve the needs of our customers while taking care of our stakeholders, while being responsible. And in doing so, these investments will need to be done with a long-term view in mind. In-period KPIs may not be appropriate as a measure here, but we are going to push through and remain consistent in delivering what we believe is going to be a preparation for the next system.
Correct. Talking about the measure using KPI, probably like you mentioned, is not suitable, as all of these situations are full of uncertainty. And will Petronas continue to diverse upstream, downstream international ventures? How is it downstream?
We manage all our investments as a portfolio. The process and activity of portfolio optimization is a normal course of activity for any enterprise such as ours. I think the lens that has been applied here is the apparent perception that Petronas is offloading assets. In fact, it's using our assets, Petronas is using our assets as currency to grow our funnel beyond this near term. A very good example, I think now that I can speak about it, we've gone to the JV framework agreement stage with our partner ENI. It's part of our Malaysia assets. Am I moving too far back for you?
No,
okay. with the JVFA that we've signed with ENI, the assets now help build up a funnel of hydrocarbon production in the future, giving us a longer life for our total portfolio reserves. In our partnerships with Total, it is monetizing more difficult fields, but attaining what we hope to deliver, which is advantage barrels. We need to deliver them with lower cost and lower emissions. And all of this is part of addressing the harsh reality today, where 70 to 80% of our energy systems still powered by fossil fuels. You can't displace them overnight, but as we start to roll in renewables, more robust grids, we need to supply energy to those who need it in a more responsible fashion. We do this through partnerships. And what is perceived to be divestment is in fact creating a longer runway for Petronas to continue its growth.
All right, amazing. We look forward to seeing how this conversation turns into action for the region and Malaysia. Again, Tan Sri, I want to say thank you very much for your time and sharing the insight. Hope to see you again. Definitely, I will release you for a very, very busy week for you. And again, for those who missed out my exclusive interview with Group and Petronas CEO of Petronas, Tan Sri Tengku Taufik, you can catch how the conversation of Petronas not only continues to lead the conversations of energy transition, but also shaping the directions of Asia's energy future. And definitely you can feature and see all of this in AWANI.com and across all of our social media platforms.
Nak coklat? Hari ni tak boleh. Nanti saya kena dengan mak saya.
Pepsodent baharu disahkan halal. Mikrokalsium aktif dan Pro-Florida kompleks membantu memperbaiki lubang halus akibat makanan manis sebelum menjadi kaviti untuk perlindungan maksimum. Pepsodent.
Heroes kembali di saluran 100.
Change the world, no matter what.
Menegakkan keadilan dengan cara tersendiri. Mempertahankan kebenaran. Melindungi dari kuasa halus.
Marilah tepat petualang bangsa.
Bersama kita bangkit lebih teguh. Stream semua hero kegemaran anda di saluran 100 dan Astro Go. Bila-bila masa, apa jua cara.
Baik, bertemu kembali dalam Niaga Awani bersama saya Nabilah. Khaleeda, sekarang kita akan beralih kepada perkembangan harga minyak mentah global yang mencatatkan kenaikan mendadak susulan ketegangan terbaru di Asia Barat. Dan saya akan tunjukkan pergerakan di laman Market Watch. Kita akan lihat di mana kita akan lihat pergerakan harga dua penanda aras utama iaitu Brent dan juga West Texas Intermediate atau WTI. Kalau boleh saya tunjukkan sini, kita mulakan dengan perkembangan dengan minyak Brent, di mana kalau untuk setakat hari ini pada jam 2.05 pagi, ia pada harga angka terkini adalah $76.57 setong, menunjukkan penurunan 0.17%. Ini adalah terkini, 0.23% dan penurunan sebanyak 0.18 mata. Dan kalau saya nak tunjukkan pergerakan harga minyak Brent untuk dalam jangka masa seminggu bermula dengan hari Isnin, ia dibuka tinggi juga dalam sekitar, kalau boleh kita tunjuk dalam lebih kurang 75.99, namun ia menurun harganya dalam kiraan dolar setong pada memasuki hari Selasa. Namun ketegangan itu memuncak, harga juga melonjak sehinggalah mencapai menghampiri $77.5 setong. Itu adalah berkenaan dengan minyak Brent. Kalau boleh saya tunjukkan dari segi harga WTI ataupun crude oil untuk setakat pagi 9.05 PM, harganya adalah $75.15 setong, meningkat sedikit 0.01% dan 0.01 mata. Dan kalau kita boleh lihat pergerakan harga itu dalam jangka masa seminggu minggu ia bermula tinggi, dibuka tinggi dalam sekitar 74.11, namun bergerak naik turun sehinggalah hari ini, terutama pada Selasa, Rabu dan Khamis hari ini, lonjakan nilai harga minyak itu tinggi melebihi paras $75 setung. Itu adalah berkenaan dengan kedua-dua minyak Brent dan juga WTI, dan lonjakan harga ini dipacu oleh kebimbangan terhadap gangguan bekalan berikutan konflik terbuka antara Iran dan Israel yang mencetuskan ketidaktentuan di kawasan pengeluaran minyak utama dunia, dan ancaman terhadap laluan penghantaran minyak seperti Selat Hormuz turut memburukkan sentimen pasaran. Dan sebagai negara pengeluar minyak, Malaysia mungkin menerima limpahan hasil yang positif dalam jangka pendek, namun pada masa yang sama kita perlu bersedia dengan kemungkinan kesan domino terhadap harga bahan api tempatan dan kadar inflasi keseluruhan. Namun kalau kita ambil dari segi laporan ataupun petikan CIMB Securities yang berhad, konflik Iran-Israel memberikan risiko ekonomi langsung yang terhad kepada Malaysia berikutan pendedahan perdagangan negara itu yang minimum terhadap rantau ini. Dan situasi sebelum ini menunjukkan kenaikan harga minyak berkaitan konflik biasanya bersifat sementara, dan katanya risiko luar jangka utama ialah peningkatan aktiviti ketenteraan yang berterusan, terutamanya jika ia mengganggu Selat Hormuz atau melibatkan kuasa besar global seperti Amerika Syarikat atau kuasa serantau lain. Jadi untuk mengulas lanjut, kita akan terus bersama dengan Profesor Madya Dr. Aimi Zulhazmi Abdul Rashid, penganalisis ekonomi UniKL Business School. Prof, pertama sekali, kalau kita lihat ketika harga minyak dunia semakin muncak ini, ramai mengatakan Malaysia tidak akan terkesan secara langsung kerana kita adalah pengeksport bersih minyak. Tapi sejauh mana ketenangan ini boleh dikekalkan jika konflik berpanjangan dan seterusnya menjejaskan rantaian bekalan global? Silakan.
Baik, Assalamualaikum Nabilah dan selamat pagi semua. Pertamanya, kalau kita nak fahamkan perdagangan minyak ni, apa yang kita Malaysia melalui Petronas membekalkan kepada dunia, menjual kepada dunia adalah kita panggil sweet crude. Sweet crude ni adalah katakan sulfur yang paling kurang sekali lah dalam minyak mentah itu sendiri. Dan kita jual, tetapi yang kita pakai adalah minyak yang kita import, terutamanya daripada Timur Tengah lah, pada Saudi Arabia, melalui Aramco dan sebagainya, pada harga yang lebih rendah daripada apa yang kita jualkan. Kalau kita nak katakan pada ukuran sekarang, kita ada betul dalam keadaan sebagai net eksporter minyak adalah betul, tetapi kita sebenarnya terdedah juga kepada apa yang katakan kenaikan ataupun penurunan harga minyak dunia. Kerana kita mengimport kegunaan kita sendiri, walaupun kita menjual, jumlah kita jual itu mungkin lebih kurang pada masa ini masih lagi keuntungannya masih lagi melebihi keuntungan masih melebihi harga yang kita beli daripada luar. Tapi dia tidak akan berterusan lah. Ini disebabkan oleh kenaikan penggunaan kita dan sebagainya. Jadi konflik yang berpanjangan ini banyak memberikan kesan bila mungkin pada kenaikan pada harga minyak itu sendiri, kenaikan kadar inflasi, kos pengangkutan, insurans dan sebagainya.
Baik, dan pada masa sama Petronas juga ada menyatakan paras $50 Amerika setung sebagai sweet spot untuk kelangsungan tenaga. Jadi dengan harga kini yang jauh melebihi paras itu, mungkin pada pandangan Prof, apa kesan langsung dan tidak langsung pada fiskal negara dan juga pelaburan dan inflasi?
Hasil minyak daripada Petronas menyumbangkan kira-kira 15% kepada pendapatan kerajaan. Jadi sekiranya Petronas dapat menjual harga minyak lebih, seperti kita dapat lihat pada tahun 2023, maka kerajaan dapat keuntungan lebih. Tetapi pada tahun 2024 dan tahun 2025 ni harga minyak makin menurun, dan dijangkakan juga pendapatan kerajaan juga akan menurun. Jadi kesan langsungnya adalah kekurangan pendapatan kepada kerajaan, dan kerajaan terpaksa mencari hasil pendapatan yang lain dan tidak perlu bergantung kepada jualan fuel fosil iaitu sama ada minyak dan gas. Jadi ia turut menjejaskan kewangan kerajaan. Pada masa yang sama juga kerajaan dalam dasar mengembang dengan kewangan tahun ini, perbelanjaan tahun 2025 adalah terbesar dalam sejarah, iaitu 421 bilion siap saya. Jadi apa yang berlaku sekarang dengan tujuan kerajaan untuk mengadakan subsidi bersasar ini adalah selari dengan apa yang berlaku di pasaran dunia sebenarnya, Nabilah.
Dan kalau kita lihat kepada sentimen yang di mana Malaysia sering dianggap mempunyai insurans semula jadi kerana hasil minyaknya yang dikeluarkan, tetapi kalau kita lihat, adakah hasil ini sebenarnya mencukupi untuk menampung tekanan subsidi yang berlaku pada ketika ini, terutamanya apabila subsidi bersasar sedang diperluas, Prof?
Okey, baik. Jumlah subsidi keseluruhan negara kalau kita tengok pada tahun 2022-2023 mencecah hingga 70 hingga 80 bilion. Dan separuhnya, ada lebih daripada separuh, iaitu kira-kira 40 hingga 45 bilion adalah subsidi bahan api. Jadi kita perlu mengurangkan kerana jumlah 70-80 bilion ini melebihi juga perbelanjaan pembangunan kita. Jadi duit itu kita boleh gunakan untuk membangunkan banyak sekolah, lebuh raya, hospital dan sebagainya untuk lebih kepada kebajikan rakyat. Dan kita faham kenapa subsidi pukar yang dilaksanakan itu terpaksa ditukar kepada subsidi sasar kerana ada pelbagai sebab penyalahgunaan subsidi itu sendiri, penyalahgunaan industri, kes penyeludupan, ke negara jiran dan sebagainya. Ini menyebabkan orang yang membayar cukai seperti kita rakyat Malaysia ini menanggung kerugian itu sendiri. Kalau duit itu boleh digunakan dalam keadaan lebih baik. Jadi memanglah kalau kita hanya menganggapkan kita ini sebagai kita ada insurans semua jadi kita pengulang minyak, walaupun kita bukan sebesar negara-negara Arab. Tetapi sebenarnya pada masa yang sama juga kita harus mengimbangi. Dan kita juga tidak terlalu bergantung kepada hasil minyak sebenarnya sebagai pendapatan kerajaan. Seperti saya katakan tadi, hanyalah merangkumi lebih kurang 15% daripada pendapatan kerajaan datangnya daripada Petronas.
Jadi bukan kita tidak akan menerima kesan secara langsung dan mungkin dijangka akan berlaku hanya dalam jangka masa sederhana. Tapi kalau dari segi solusi, mungkin kalau dari segi jangka panjang kita boleh dari segi pelaksanaan SST itu sendiri dan kita boleh ambil daripada blok-blok ekonomi dari segi ASEAN, GCC dan China, itu adalah dari segi solusi jangka panjang. Kalau dalam jangka pendek, pada pendapat Prof, apa langkah yang wajar dipertimbangkan kerajaan untuk kekal melindungi rakyat tanpa menjejaskan kedudukan fiskal, sama ada melalui dasar harga siling, pelarasan subsidi ataupun penyusunan semula unjuran ekonomi itu?
Kerajaan sedang melaksanakan sebenarnya ni, terutamanya dalam kalau kita tengok dari plan ekonomi madani itu sendiri, walaupun dia berjangka panjang dan sederhana, tetapi pelaksanaannya itu dilakukan secara sekarang dan kita dapat lihat bagaimana pelaksanaan subsidi sasar untuk DC dilakukan pada bulan Mei tahun lepas, dan kita jangkakan RON 95 akan berlaku pada pertengahan tahun ini. Mungkin Julai ataupun mungkin ditangguhkan lagi. Itu bergantung kepada kedudukan atau keputusan kerajaan. Penstrukturan semula ini memang menyakitkan kerana kita sudah terbiasa dengan kos-kos petrol yang rendah, ke mana ke sana ke sini balik kampung sebenarnya kos rendah, tapi lepas mungkin minyak mungkin tidak lagi RM2 di mesin. Tetapi seperti yang dikatakan oleh Yang Amat Perdana Menteri, tidak semua rakyat Malaysia terkesan. Hanyalah golongan T5 ataupun T15 saja yang tidak akan menikmati RON 95 itu. Bagaimanakah mekanisme dan sebagainya. Dalam jangka masa pendek ini kita nak tahu apakah Kementerian Kewangan akan menggunakan MyCard seperti yang dikatakan itu. Bagaimanakah sistem pengawasannya di stesen minyak. Bagaimanakah kita setiap orang mendapat kuota ataupun setiap keluarga mendapat kuota. Itu yang kita mahu tahu daripada kerajaan. Jadi komunikasi itu penting dan semua ini adalah untuk kebaikan. Rakyat perlu faham, rakyat perlu mempunyai buy-in dalam penstrukturan semula ekonomi oleh kerajaan.
Dengan semua ini yang berlaku dengan tekanan harga minyak dan pelarasan subsidi juga dan pelaksanaan SST, bagaimana ia boleh mempengaruhi belanjawan 2026? Adakah kerajaan perlu berhati-hati dalam merangkanya dalam jangka masa sebelum bulan Oktober ini, Prof?
Ya, belanjawan 2026 ni adalah satu yang krusial kerana dia berlaku di banyak faktor di dalam maupun di luar negara. Faktor di luar negara kita sudah maklum dengan banyak pergolakan geopolitik yang berlaku, dengan Trump tarif yang berlaku kepada perdagangan kita dengan harga minyak disebabkan oleh peperangan antara Iran dan Israel. Pada yang sama juga dalam domestik tempatan kita juga, kita mahukan ekonomi domestik kita terus kencang, terus mampan. Tapi pada yang sama juga kita mahu menyusun semula ekonomi, meletakkan subsidi bersasar dan sebagainya. Jadi belanjawan 2026 ni saya rasakan cukup lebih mencabar kerana situasinya berada pada tempatan maupun pada untuk faktor-faktor luar negara itu begitu banyak sekali dan variable-variable yang patut kerajaan lihat bagaimanakah ia perlu dilaksanakan dengan lebih baik dan mampan supaya momentum ekonomi kita akan terus dalam keadaan positif, dalam terus menarik pelabur asing, ya, semua rakyat dapat menikmati kemakmuran dan sebagainya.
Dan kalau jika penyelarasan subsidi RON 95 itu dilaksanakan, adakah perlu tempoh penyesuaian yang dilaksanakan ataupun perlu satu tempoh untuk semua pihak dan rakyat do some adjustment sebelum penguatkuasaan penuh dilaksanakan?
Saya rasakan itu adalah langkah yang terbaik, Nabilah, kerana rakyat harus tahu mekanisme bagaimanakah ia akan dilaksanakan, contohnya pada RON 95, kerana ia melibatkan semua lapisan masyarakat, daripada anak sekolah maupun daripada ibu yang mengantar anak ke sekolah dan sebagainya, maupun mereka yang bekerja. Berbeza dengan diesel yang penggunaannya lebih kepada pihak bahagian industri, perniagaan dan sebagainya, yang telah maklum kos mereka yang sebenar. Tetapi apabila kita melaksanakan RON 95 ini, ia bersangkut paut dengan the purchasing power. Ya, purchasing power. Rakyat tertanya macam mana nak laksanakan. Saya sekarang mungkin akan belanja mungkin RM200 sebulan untuk minyak. Adakah lepas ni saya kena bayar RM300? Ya, jadi RM100 ekstra itu mana saya nak cari? Adakah saya harus memotong belanjaan saya di tempat lain dan sebagainya. Jadi mekanisme saya rasakan ia harus dicuba, ya. Kita harus adakan beberapa pilot projek dan sebagainya supaya rakyat faham, dan sistem feedback juga amat penting, ya, pada kerajaan untuk memahami apakah apa yang berlaku di luar sana lah, supaya rakyat memahami apa yang berlaku.
Yang terakhir, Prof, berbakikan dalam lebih kurang 2 minit, sekiranya kita ambil situasi kalau konflik di Timur Tengah atau Asia Barat memuncak, sebagai contoh jika Selat Hormuz diserang atau ditutup oleh Amerika Syarikat, bagaimana ia akan mengubah landscape perdagangan secara drastik, dan adakah Malaysia bersedia dari sudut strategi bekalan tenaga dan juga diplomasi ekonomi itu sendiri?
Baik, Selat Hormuz ni adalah satu titik yang sangat penting, ya, dalam bekalan minyak dunia. Selat Hormuz ni minyak atau gas yang keluar ni daripada negara Arab, ada daripada Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, ya, sebagainya, di situ termasuk Kuwait, ya, membekal kira-kira antara 20 hingga 30% daripada bekalan minyak dunia, ya, hantar ke China, hantar ke negara lain seluruh dunia termasuk kita lah. Jadi kesannya bila kos naik, ya, bila Selat Hormuz tutup, negara-negara yang mengekspor minyak terpaksa mencari jalan lain, mencari jalan darat, ataupun, ya, kerana jalan laut tak boleh dilalui. Jadi pada masa yang sama juga dia akan meningkatkan bila ada shortage yang bekalan, ya, dia akan menaikkan kos minyak itu sendiri. Dan pada yang sama, kalau dia perlu contohnya membuatkan pipe minyak yang baru merentas Saudi Arabia dan sebagainya, ia juga akan melibatkan kos yang besar juga. Jadi apa yang berlaku ini nanti dia akan melonjakkan harga minyak, ya, untuk, bagi saya, bukan satu jangka masa yang pendek tetapi juga satu jangka masa yang panjang, kerana sekiranya peperangan ini berlarutan sehingga memaksa Iran itu menutup Selat Hormuz, ya, jadi ia akan menjadi satu ancaman kepada bekalan minyak dunia sebenarnya.
Dan saya kira semua pun masih mengambil pendekatan tunggu dan lihat pada waktu ini, dan kita akan saksikan ataupun tunggu pergerakan ataupun pendekatan daripada yang dilakukan oleh Amerika Syarikat nanti. Tapi terima kasih diucapkan kepada Profesor Madya Dr. Aimi Zulhazmi Abdul Rashid, penganalisis ekonomi UniKL Business School, dan segalanya akan kami rangkumkan dalam semua platform digital Astro AWANI. Forum Ekonomi Antarabangsa St. Petersburg menyaksikan pameran inovasi terkini yang mencerminkan perubahan drastik teknologi Rusia dalam mendepani dunia yang kian berpecah. Metaverse antara yang jadi tumpuan, dan editor kanan Najib Aroff ada perinciannya. Silakan.
Forum Ekonomi Antarabangsa St. Petersburg 2025 SPIEF melabuhkan tirai untuk hari pertama, dan sudah pasti ada banyak isu yang dibincangkan berkait dengan tema yang diangkat, iaitu perkongsian nilai ketika dunia berdepan dengan multipolar, dunia yang berpecah pada ketika ini. Bagaimanakah Rusia selaku tuan rumah pada ketika ini mengangkat agenda ini bersama-sama dengan peserta-peserta lebih daripada 90 buah negara delegasi yang hadir di sini. Dan bukan itu saja, malah kita ingin melihat juga aspek lain yang juga diberikan tumpuan, khususnya di sideline event tersebut, yang mana ini mencerminkan inovasi yang diketengahkan dan yang sangat menarik sekali. Dan Astro AWANI berkesempatan juga menemui salah seorang peserta di pameran ini, yang mana mereka menghasilkan satu sistem Metaverse tetapi untuk sektor pembinaan. Dan kita melihat bagaimana sektor pembinaan ini dia sangat cost oriented, dan pada akhirnya bagaimana untuk kita satukan daripada awal peringkat tersebut, kontraktor kepada pembinaan, kepada pembekal bahan mentah dan sebagainya dalam platform Metaverse, sehingga boleh menyaksikan penurunan kos ataupun pengawalan kos yang lebih ketara dalam sektor pembinaan, dan juga akan menghasilkan produk yang berkualiti dan pada masa sama menjimatkan. Dan bagaimана ini boleh dipelajari oleh negara-negara bangun termasuk juga Malaysia. Kita dengarkan apa yang dikatakan oleh Meta Time AI.
Наша компания называется Верескинг. Мы занимаемся созданием строительной метаверсии. Это среда, где соединяется огромное количество процессов в рамках строительства. Туда добавляется программируемая часть. И строить в метаверсии становится быстро и, главное, что очень дешево. Если посмотреть на машину, то машина состоит из огромного количества частей, процессов, механизмов. И если бы у машины не было руля, то машина, в принципе, никуда бы не поехала. И наша задача сделать этот руль очень простым и быстрым, чтобы возможность у каждого человека, который хотел бы быстро построить, за адекватные деньги построить, он сел бы за нашу с партнерами метаверсию строительной среды и быстро выполнил свой объект.
Okey, itu sedikit rangkuman. Itu baru satu cerita. Ada banyak lagi cerita lain, khususnya di innovation space yang menempatkan apakah inovasi terkini yang dibawakan oleh Rusia yang ingin dipamerkan di peringkat antarabangsa. Persoalan besar yang kita ingin lihat, bagaimanakah dunia yang berpecah pada ketika ini boleh didapatkan jurangnya itu dengan teknologi seperti ini, dan bagaimana untuk bergerak ke hadapan dalam konteks multipolar pada ketika ini. Dan fokus seterusnya di SPIEF 2025 ini kita ingin melihat dalam konteks geopolitik, geoekonomi juga, khususnya dalam konteks BRICS, yang mana Malaysia baru menyertai selaku negara rakan kongsi, dan juga perang yang berlaku pada ketika ini, bagaimana ini mempengaruhi percakapan, diskusi di SPIEF 2025. Kembali kepada rakan tugas di studio.
Kerajaan Sabah komited melaksanakan pelbagai inisiatif secara menyeluruh untuk memelihara serta memperkasakan warisan budaya rakyat berbilang kaum di negeri itu.
Setakat ini, tahun ini seramai 55,457 penerima di seluruh Sarawak telah menerima bantuan di bawah sistem e-bantuan JKM.
MEBS secara rasmi ditubuhkan. MEBS berperanan sebagai platform penyelarasan dan pelaksanaan dasar strategi ekonomi biru Sabah.
Beka banget.
Bagi tahu siapa kampung ni yang anak engkau tu dusta dan derhaka.
Aku takkan tarik balik report. Betul ke Noha maafkan dia ni?
Dia kena buat apa yang Noha nak. Merangkak, cium kaki Noha.
Macam Noha je, Noha.
Kau budak! Aku nak ambil hak aku, Noha. Langkah mayat aku dulu.
Dengan mudah tak mati hidup. Dia bukan syurga. Di Astroria dan Astro Go.
5 lelaki penghantar makanan didakwa di Mahkamah Magistrate Bangi atas tuduhan membunuh seorang pemandu kereta lelaki dalam satu kejadian.
4 sungai di sekitar kawasan perindustrian Pasir Gudang di Johor termasuk Sungai Kim Kim didapati tercemar dan berada pada tahap yang membimbangkan. Kerajaan sudah mulakan inisiatif untuk menggantikan kenderaan operasinya kepada kenderaan elektrik EV dalam skala kecil terlebih dahulu.
Stream Walking with Dinosaurs on BBC Earth and win exclusive merchandise with Astro Rewards.
Reserve Persekutuan Amerika Syarikat Fed mengekalkan kadar faedah pada Julai 4.25 hingga 4.50% buat kali keempat berturut-turut sambil memberi isyarat kemungkinan dua pemotongan kadar menjelang akhir 2025. Pengerusi Fed Jerome Powell menegaskan bahawa prospek kadar faedah masih berpandukan data dan berwaspada susulan kecenderungan inflasi yang mungkin meningkat akibat pelaksanaan tarif import oleh pentadbiran Presidennya Donald Trump. Beliau juga memberi amaran bahawa kesan tarif import yang dibincangkan secara kompleks antara pengilang, pengeksport dan peruncit berkemungkinan menyebabkan pengguna akhir membayar harga yang lebih tinggi. Dalam unjuran ekonomi terbaru, Fed meramalkan pertumbuhan keluaran dalam negara kasar KDNK hanya akan berada pada 1.4% pada 2025, lebih rendah daripada jangkaan sebelumnya. Inflasi dijangka mencecah 3% menjelang akhir tahun, melepasi sasaran 2%, manakala kadar pengangguran meningkat sedikit kepada 4.5%. Meskipun begitu, Powell menegaskan bahawa pasaran buruh masih kukuh dan Fed akan terus bersikap neutral menunggu data lanjut sebelum mengambil sebarang tindakan dasar.
Despite elevated uncertainty, the economy is in a solid position. The unemployment rate remains low and the labor market is at or near maximum employment. Inflation has come down a great deal, but has been running somewhat above our 2% longer run objective. In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. We believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance of monetary policy based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. Changes to trade, immigration, fiscal, and regulatory policies continue to evolve, and their effects on the economy remain uncertain. The median projection projects.
Presiden Donald Trump sekali lagi mengkritik pengerusi Reserve Persekutuan Jerome Powell dengan menyifatkannya sebagai bodoh susulan keputusan Bank Pusat untuk mengekalkan kadar faedah buat kali keempat berturut-turut. Beberapa jam sebelum pengumuman rasmi oleh Jawatankuasa Pasaran Terbuka Persekutuan FOMC, Trump menyuarakan kemungkinan untuk melantik dirinya sendiri ke jawatan tersebut apabila tempoh Powell tamat tahun depan. Trump turut menyatakan bahawa kadar faedah sepatutnya diturunkan sebanyak 2% dan menyalahkan Powell atas kos pembiayaan hutang negara yang tinggi yang dijangka mencecah $1.2 trilion tahun ini. Walaupun tekanan politik semakin meningkat, Fed kekal dengan pendirian berhati-hati memantau kesan tarif dan ketidaktentuan ekonomi global sebelum membuat sebarang pelarasan dasar.
So we have a stupid person, frankly, at the Fed. He probably won't cut today. Europe had 10 cuts and we had none. And I guess he's a political guy. I don't know. He's a political guy who's not a smart person, but he's costing the country a fortune. So what I'm going to do is, he gets out in about 9 months. He gets fortunately terminated.
Look, from my standpoint, it's not complicated. What everyone on the FOMC wants is a good, solid American economy with a strong labor market and price stability. That's what we want. We think our policy is well positioned right now to deliver that and to be able to respond in a timely way as the data lead us around. The economy's been resilient, and part of that is our stance. And again, we think we're in a good place on that to respond to significant economic developments. That's what matters. That is what matters to us. Pretty much that's all that matters to us.
Begitu perkembangan terkini yang berlaku di Amerika Syarikat. Namun berkenaan dengan ringgit, ia ditutup lebih rendah berbanding dolar Amerika Syarikat pada Rabu menjelang keputusan mengenai kadar faedah Amerika Syarikat lewat hari ini dan ketegangan antara Israel dan Iran yang terus meningkat. Pada 6 petang, mata wang tempatan berada pada 4.2500 atau 2550 berbanding dolar Amerika daripada 4.2390 atau 2475 semasa ditutup semalam. Dan saya akan kongsikan pergerakan ringgit untuk setakat hari ini pada jam 9.40 pagi. Pada waktu ini ia berada pada paras 4.2545. Kita dapat saksikan kalau jika untuk pengetahuan penonton, jika graf itu menurun, nilai ringgit itu mengukuh, manakala jika graf itu menaik dan nilai ringgit itu melemah berbanding dengan $1 Amerika Syarikat. Dan kita dapat saksikan turun naik nilai ringgit itu pada kadar terendah. Kalau kita dapat lihat dari sini dalam jangka masa lebih kurang seminggu lebih, paling kukuh adalah sekitar nilainya adalah pada 4.2. Kalau kita dapat lihat sini 4.2001 iaitu pada 27 Mei 2025. Ini adalah paling kukuh. Namun kalau kita dapat saksikan nilai ringgit itu paling melemah pada kadar pada waktu ini adalah 4.2545, namun paling lemah adalah sekitar pada bulan Mei iaitu sekitar 21 Mei dengan nilai itu adalah 4.2988 berbanding dengan dolar Amerika Syarikat. Dan ini adalah di mana situasi yang berlaku susulan daripada pengenalan tarif timbal balik Amerika Syarikat dan seterusnya berlaku perang dagang antara Iran dan Israel yang menyebabkan harga minyak mentah itu meningkat, dan semua ini memberi kesan dan juga mendorong kepada turun naik kepada nilai ringgit itu sendiri. Ini adalah setakat hari ini. Namun untuk bursa Malaysia pula, ia mencatatkan dagangan tidak menentu pada Rabu dan ditutup hampir tidak berubah dengan indeks bergerak dalam jajaran kecil di tengah-tengah ketidaktentuan global apabila para pelabur enggan mengambil pegangan jangka panjang. Dan pada 5 petang semalam, FTSE Bursa Malaysia KLCI FBM KLCI pulih daripada penurunan awalnya naik 0.31 mata atau 0.02% kepada 1511.95 daripada paras penutup 1511.64 pada Selasa. Baik, untuk setakat hari ini, pembukaan pagi ini saya akan tunjukkan pergerakan bursa saham Malaysia FBM KLCI setakat jam 9.27 pagi. Ia berada pada paras 1508.80, turun 0.21% dan turun 3.15 mata. Dan saya akan tunjukkan pergerakan FTSE Bursa Malaysia KLCI dalam jangka masa seminggu, dan kita dapat lihat pada Jumaat ia sekitar dalam lebih kurang 1515, lebih tinggi sedikit berbanding hari ini. Namun memasuki hari Selasa, hari Isnin, hari Selasa dan Rabu menunjukkan penurunan yang agak ketara dan signifikan di sini sehinggalah mencapai lebih kurang 1510 parasnya dan terus mengekalkan kadar yang lebih orang kata lebih kurang sama sehinggalah hari pembukaan pagi ini iaitu pada Khamis. Dan ini adalah berikutan faktor-faktor luaran yang juga menyumbang kepada pergerakan bursa saham Malaysia, dan ini adalah angka yang terkini dan kita akan terus pantau pergerakan kedua-duanya ringgit dan bursa pada hari esok, hari Jumaat, dan kita dapat saksikan di mana parasnya untuk hari seterusnya dan hari akan mendatang. Namun untuk perkembangan seterusnya kita akan saksikan penerangan oleh wakil daripada Forum Ekonomi Dunia, dan kita akan terusnya berhenti rehat seketika dan kita akan kembali selepas ini.
The world's economic engine is losing speed. Inequality is growing, while growth rates have dropped by half or more since the early 2000s in both advanced and developing economies. Trade disruptions, climbing debt, mounting geopolitical tension, and continued environmental damage are upending how economies function, forcing us to take a hard look at how we define and pursue prosperity.
Around the world, this tension between desperately wanting more growth, but at the same time wanting less growth. Economic growth is associated with almost every measure of human flourishing. Economies that grow faster have higher living standards. People live longer and healthier. They have better education systems. But it's also clear that this economic growth comes at a tremendous price, damage to the environment, to widening inequalities in society.
So we find ourselves caught in a tug of war. We need growth to create jobs, fund public services, and tackle big challenges like poverty and climate change, but cannot continue to grow at these costs. This tension is known as the growth dilemma. Some experts say that to solve this dilemma, we need more growth. Others say less. And some say we need to rethink growth entirely.
These are some of the hardest questions we can ask one another. They're questions about what we ought to value. The question we face as a society isn't simply do we want more or less growth, but it's also what type of growth do we want as well. And I'm really interested in how we can change the nature of growth.
This expert explains.
When many people think about the idea of economic growth, the sort of metaphor that they have in mind is train drivers sitting in a train, and they can push forward on the throttle and go faster, and they can pull back and go slower. But the sort of direction of travel is set for them by the rails that are fixed in front of them. A far better metaphor is a nautical one. You know, we can lift up our sails and go faster, or we can pull them down and go slower. But there's also a huge amount of discretion over our direction of travel. We can take lots of different routes over the open sea.
Although the pursuit of growth sits at the center of modern economies, it's a relatively recent development. How did we come to view growth this way?
Before the 1950s, almost no politicians, policymakers, economists, anyone was talking about the idea of economic growth. And even if people had wanted to, there was no reliable measure of how large the economy was, whether it was growing, and if so, by how much. That only changes with World War II. Basic question when waging war is how much of the economy can be sliced up and dedicated to the war effort. To the great frustration of British policymakers in the 1940s, there was no way of measuring how large the economy was.
Enter economists John Maynard Keynes and Simon Kuznets. They built the first reliable measure of an economy's size, gross domestic product, or GDP. It tracks goods and services, or how much an economy produces with its resources. Over time, the pursuit of growth comes to mean one thing: relentlessly driving this number upwards.
The way growth becomes such a priority is when the Cold War begins, there's no traditional measures of who's winning. Territory won and lost, soldiers killed, weapons destroyed. And it's growth that becomes a sort of proxy to tell who's winning that conflict. As the 20th century unfolds and the demands of war fall away, the pursuit of growth stubbornly remained behind. So it almost got there by accident.
Accidental or not, we still rely heavily on GDP today. It's used to measure how quickly countries recover after crises like war and pandemics, assess competitiveness, and gauge the impact of trade restrictions. But there's a lot that such a narrow metric can't tell us, like what a society values or how well an economy is functioning for its people. In a climate of rising geoeconomic tensions, can we continue to define success this way?
It's not simply a bad measure of economic value in the market, but it's also a bad measure of what we think is socially valuable in society. My response to the failings of the GDP measure is to identify other things that we think are socially valuable and important and put them alongside the GDP measure in a dashboard. Perhaps the state of the environment, perhaps the level of inequality in society, perhaps the availability of good work, perhaps how well our political system is functioning.
Expanding how we measure growth means asking what matters to us as well as economic output, and allows us to track how sustainable and inclusive our progress is. But how do we decide what metrics to include, and who gets to make that call?
One of the great mistakes of the 20th century was to leave it to economists and statisticians and treasuries and government departments to treat it as a technical problem. I think it's up to citizens and it's for politics to decide what gets to go on the dashboard. So I think this is one of the great political questions of our time, and it's for citizens to answer.
So how can we grow in the way that we want to ultimately build the kinds of economies and societies that we want to live in? Where can more human-centered growth come from?
Although politicians and policymakers talk very confidently about the causes of growth today, we actually know very little about it. One lesson that we can draw out of all this fog of uncertainty is that growth comes from technological progress, and technological progress comes from discovering more ideas about the world. Growth doesn't come from using more and more finite resources, more land, more raw materials, building wider roads, building faster trains, building more houses. Growth comes by discovering ever more innovative, creative, inventive, productive ways of using the resources that we have.
We're already seeing smarter ways to grow. renewable energy lets us produce clean power faster and cheaper. Smart farming technologies like IoT and soil sensors allow farmers to grow more with fewer resources. And the internet has made education more accessible around the world. But because the digital divide remains wide, making sure technology closes gaps and doesn't expand them will be key to ensuring growth benefits everybody.
Technology has an extraordinary promise, but it's not predetermined. We have to make sure that we use technology in a way that benefits society, reforming intellectual property, investing vastly more in research and development, encouraging more people into the parts of the economy that are responsible for generating ideas. We can change the nature of growth as a society if we want to. So the sorts of technologies we develop don't simply make us more prosperous, but they also protect those other important things that we might care about. That, it seems to me, is where prosperity will come from in the 21st century.
Kami keabangan.
Bagi tahu sampai kampung ni yang anak kau tu dosa dan derhaka.
Aku takkan tarik balik report.
Betul ke Nuha maafkan dia ni?
Dia kena buat apa yang Nuha nak. Merangkak, cium kaki Nuha.
Pasal Nuha je, Nuha.
Kau budak! Aku nak ambil hak aku, Nuha. Langkah mayat aku dulu.
Dengan mudah tak menjadi hidup. Dia bukan syurga. Di Astro Ria dan Astro Go.
Tariffs on imports of products from China reaching up to 145%.
Tariffs on the rest of the world are sitting at 10%, with the potential for reciprocal tariffs to be reimposed within 90 days.
Kunjungan rasmi Presiden China ke Malaysia ini menunjukkan komitmen kedua-dua negara untuk meningkatkan hubungan diplomatik ke tahap yang lebih strategik.
Perusahaan kecil dan sederhana, impian besar. Jiwa SME Astro AWANI kembali menjelajah Malaysia. Dari Ipoh ke Kota Kinabalu, dari Melaka ke Lembah Kelang. Sesi pitching, pameran produk dan dialog bersama pemimpin industri serantau. Dapatkan inspirasi, ilmu dan peluang untuk kembangkan perniagaan anda semuanya di bawah satu bumbung. Kerana inilah medan impak sebenar. Jiwa SME menjana impak, inovasi digital.
Gempur di AWANI 7.45.
Thanks for joining us. This is The Economy. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. In the office of mine right now is Professor Wong Chin Huat of Sanwe University, a keen political scientist, discussing about the discourse of the environment of the political world of Malaysia and how it ties down to the economy quite directly. So Chin Huat, let's talk about some of the ongoings. Yeah, the former economy minister and the former NRES minister left despite final or last-minute overtures by the Prime Minister Yang Muhammad Datuk Seri Anwar, saying that he approved of their leave. He may not necessarily approve of their decision to resign, but clearly both has indeed left office. Rafizi has not only served notice, but he has gone past that. Nick Nazmi technically is still serving notice up until 3rd July, but generally speaking, the consensus is he has left as well.
Yeah.
So, first of all, why do you think that Anwar is still thinking about, I guess, leaving the door open for them to come back? Let's talk about that first before anything.
I think that's very natural and smart of Anwar to do so, because PKR today consists of two parts of the base. One is the loyalist establishment base, aligned with Anwar fully. The other one would be those sort of reformists and more idealist base, if you like. If Rafizi and Nick Nazmi were pushed out, then basically the other half would either not come out to vote, or may support third parties or cast their vote in protest in any way. Now, PKR doesn't really have too many safe seats. If the turnout is low, PKR could lose half of its seats.
So we're looking at 31 seats right now, half of that, 15, that
15,
might be
16.
gone.
Yeah, that's possible. Because it just depends on where you lose your turnout, right? Now, what it means is that it's pointless to be PKR next president, hoping to be prime minister, if your party is number 6 or number 7 in the parliament. So that's something very real. And therefore, I think both sides, both Anwar and Rafizi, should see their common interest to keep the party together. The only way to do that is to go against Malaysian conventional wisdom, that is, party should be very coherent, united under the top leader, as if like this is the Chinese Communist Party, right? But rather you have to adopt the British way. British major parties are broad church or broad tents. So you have different factions coexisting to the extent that you can be a maverick dissident government backbenchers, and you'll be tolerated. The best example is Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour Party leader. When he was the government backbencher, a government backbencher under the New Labour for 13 years, he defied his party whip for 428 times. Now that's 34 times a year in average. He was never sacked, he was never denied his candidacy.
This is consistent with the old Labour MP who Nick Nazmi quoted saying that he resigned because he wants to focus on politics a little bit more. That man also thought about the same thing, where he became a dissident in his own party.
Yes, exactly.
But collaborative still.
Exactly. And there's another guy too, also from old Labour, Robin Cook, who was the party chairman in the British context. Chairman is just basically party manager. So he's a cabinet member. He resigned to go to the backbench, and he said that I have not been the backbench for so long. I forgot how it looks from here. It's so nice. So that's a lie to say that I disagree with the government. Doesn't mean I want to bring down the government, but I have to take a stand, and therefore I go to the backbench.
Now, how does this rub with the Malaysian electorate? Because we're talking about the compare and contrast here. We're talking about 1,000-year-old democracy versus, I don't know, 1957 minus 2025 kind of democracy.
I think it's actually possible. We have evolved so fast. I mean, in the past, we have 22 years under the same prime minister. Then from 2018 to 2022, we have 5 prime ministers within 5 years, right? So we can evolve and learn very fast. It is possible. What actually, and this development, if it's steered to the right direction, it can actually solve the problems of this Madani government. The problem with Madani government is that they become, because of the compromises they have to make, so most of the parties have lost their appeal to their distinct base. DAP supporters are not happy with DAP because they're no longer outspoken. UMNO supporters are not happy with UMNO because they think that UMNO would never have a chance to come back on top. PKR supporters felt that you have compromised your idealism for power, right? How do you balance that? Is on one hand, if you are in a coalition government, of course you would have to make compromises. But that doesn't mean that you cannot have other members playing different role. This is why we need to, from pure self-interest point of view, the government party should actually strengthen the government backbench, allowing the backbenchers to play a different kind of role with the tacit understandings that you are helping us to retain our base. Now, of course, there would be some competition, even personally, between government backbenchers and frontbenchers, because ultimately backbenchers want to replace those in the front bench, right? But if people are thinking in the long term, they would be measured in their competition. So, for example, if Rafizi and Nick Nazmi were given a role to play in government backbench. That basically means that you have to expand the number of parliamentary select committees, right? And Nick Nazmi, for example, would probably take over committees on environment, and then Rafizi may take on economy. Now you could do all those, and they would want to show that I'm better than the front bench guy. That's fine, but you wouldn't go too far. You wouldn't promise moon and star like before you were in opposition, because you know, one day you get back to front bench, you cannot do all these things will come back to haunt you, right? So I think it's
so the kind of promises will be tempered and the much more realistic.
Exactly, and this is what we need to, because there's a lot of things you cannot. If you are a minister, you cannot say everything you like. This is why that ministers don't get into debate except in answering response from MPs.
Rafizi says this all the time during his political campaign for his political party.
Exactly.
But as backbencher, he's a little bit, well, not a little bit, a lot more free.
Exactly.
To do so.
Exactly. And what is more important, ultimately, what Rafizi and Nick Nazmi needs is not ministerial posts. What they need is a guarantee that they would not be taken out of their seat, because that traditionally happened, right? We have very few exceptions. One of them is Tunku Razali. He was never taken out of seats after returning to UMNO. But most cases that if you challenge and your leaders and you lose, you are expected to fade out, or at some point people will take away your seat. Now, PKR need these two guys and people like Wong Chen, because they have that appeal to the more reformist base of PKR and even PH at a wider level.
Strangely enough, these three seats, Pandan, Setiawangsa and Subang, are relative. Subang, of course, very safe. Pandan, I think so too. Setiawangsa is a little bit more dicey, but as safe as it gets, I suppose. So that is the situation right now. Where do you think the reality is going to be when it comes to the likelihood of them working together? I don't know what the mood is between, say, for instance, the personalities-wise, Datuk Sri Anwar versus Datuk Sri Rafizi. Are they able to come to terms with the whole reality of what they're facing today? Do you think that they are better off, they can see that they are better off together as opposed to apart?
I think what they need to do is look beyond the past and look to the future, right? What I mean is not about a peace plan that say, now you have lost, you come under my order. That wouldn't work. I mean, had Rafizi accepted Anwar's appeal to stay on, he would lose his appeal as Rafizi, right? That's not the kind of guy people expected of him. So what it needs to is that both sides need to see very clearly into the future. You're going to face a general elections 3 years down the road.
Is that still 3 years?
Possibly shorter. But even let's say if it's 3 years down the road, it's very likely that your party election would come later.
Yeah, I understand.
Right? Because that you can extend it.
Yeah.
So what's the main point here is that
instead
you need
of
to win,
exactly 3 years from
you need to win the G16.
Yeah.
Before talking about who's going to take up as president.
Yeah.
Right? Rafizi, of course, has his ambition. He wants to be the president at some day. He might want to.
Oh, you think so?
I think. Yeah.
Yes, nobody has ever said so, I suppose, except for political scientists.
Especially after now. But I think that go back to one question. It depends not on his ambition, but on Nurul Izzah's performance. I expect Nurul Izzah to be appointed to be the economy minister.
Let's move on to that. So from that discussion, we are now in the lull period where ministers need to be appointed. There could be some serious reshuffling happening, considering that Zafrul is finishing his term at the end of the year, and there are some overtures made by the UMNO president, Datuk Sri Zahid Hamidi, asking for the allocations for UMNO seats in the cabinet to be retained at 7, despite Zafrul leaving. There's also some overtures into the movement of some UMNO key personalities, such as Setiawangsa MP, Datuk Sri Johari Ghani, and where is he going to be placed next? One would argue that Commodities Minister is very good for him, but may not be to his speed, considering that he is much more high performance than need to be for a commodity minister. So against all of this, where do you see the movement of some of the personalities that have been mentioned, including those that are expected to replace Rafizi and Nik Nazmi? So you were mentioning about Nurul Izzah.
I think Nurul Izzah would likely be appointed as the economy minister, despite her pledge not to join the cabinet. I think that would be necessary for her because she has now got legitimate positions of being elected.
Does she? Because she is still relative.
It's true, but I think this is a part where we need to put things in perspective. Guan Yin has always been seen as son of Kit Siang when he took over, right? But when he led DAP to win big in 2008, he won his place in the party. He became Lim Guan Yin, not just son of Lim Kit Siang, right? So whenever people talk about it, I think it's quite clear that Nurul Izzah is heading to the top. But whether she could do it or not depends very much on whether she could perform. Now, where else can you perform? You can't perform as technocrats, as the Prime Minister advisor. Now that since you already taken the hit to go into the kitchen, might as well you go all out to be a minister.
What about some rumors that she might go to Selangor?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
But that goes back to whether would Amiruddin be willing to give up his seat.
Is that his choice? After all, he is still a member of the party, and the party president has the...
For her to go to, for Nurul Izzah to go to Selangor,
yeah,
the risk is as high as Tengku Zafrul.
Yeah.
Because you need a by-election.
Okay, let's talk about that as well. So where do you think Tengku Zafrul is going to end up, considering that he has left UMNO and has expressed desire to join PKR? So let's be clear, he has not yet joined.
Yeah.
But the writing is on the wall in terms of him joining anyway.
Yeah.
So where is he going to be heading into?
He has denied that he wanted a by-election, but that's why I thought that was the original plan, whether by him or by other people. So for him to have, if you could get a parliamentary seat, that's easy. If not, then you get a state seat. Of course, that he wouldn't want to be a backbencher or just an exco. He wants to be MB. But Amiruddin is not leaving Selangor because going to the federal cabinet doesn't give you job security. First of all, from the Prime Minister. Second, from election. No one guarantee that PKR would still, or PH would still dominate the next government.
Yeah.
Right? So he wouldn't want to leave. He wants to keep his castle. Now, if anyone wants to push Nurul Izzah to go for the states, she would face an even more uphill battle than Zafrul. Because that Amiruddin wouldn't be happy. Now, how can you win? I mean, today Anwar is not as popular as, immediately after the election, even for his base. So you're going to push and to stage another by-election just to install someone you like would not go down well with public opinion. And there was the lesson of Langkah Kajang. Her mother didn't do it, right? If she wanted a state seat so much, people would question, why didn't you run in 2023 in Penang?
There's some rumor in terms of even the Selangor royalty might not, or Selangor Palace might not necessarily want Aziza. That's a rumor that is, I guess, unproven until today. But just to recap, for those that might not be uninitiated, the 4 vice presidents of PKR, they're all MPs, on top of the fact that 2 out of the 4 are actually Adun holders. Nudin, the MB of Negeri Sembilan, is also the MP for PD, and of course the giant killer, I suppose, MB Selangor, who took head-to-head with Azmin, who, based on their social media, are actually quite friends, despite them going head-to-head in the previous general election. So it's not a problem of them having to sworn in as senators. They can just come in as cabinet members anytime.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So now we're looking at the 2 other folks that are inside the vice presidency, Chang Li Kang, who you think is going to be maintained as the Mosti minister?
I think he would stay in cabinet. Whether it's keep his own portfolio, that's another question.
And then what about Ramanan?
The expectation now that if you look at the Indian base, they have been quite unhappy with this government over a lot of issues, especially on religion. And to have an Indian full minister, by here I mean like for many Tamil, they wouldn't count Gobind Singh as one of their own, right?
Yeah.
So to have a Tamil full minister would probably address that. But of course, in every way that Ramanan feels very much like MIC more than PKR.
Yeah.
That's another question.
Yeah. So now let's talk about some of the thinking behind Zafrul, because we haven't landed on where do you think he will be.
Now, if he cannot go for a by-election, and he has denied that he wanted it now, the best way for him to do is to be appointed as a trade envoy with the ministerial status. So basically all you need to do is to make sure the next minister can work well with him, so you wouldn't end up having a split leadership with two heads, right? As long as that part is dealt with, that would be the best way to him. And that change can happen when cabinet reshuffle happen, or he can actually stay on for a while until 2nd of December.
Yeah. So let's talk about then who do you think will replace him as trade minister?
I think the market speculation most likely person would be Johari
Ghani.
Yeah.
The Titiwang's MP.
Yes.
Okay. Then finally, let's take a look into the timeline into all of this. First of all, let's talk about the legality of things. Can a ministry be ministerless for a long period of, even for a short period of time? Is it? What does the law say about that?
No, I don't think there's any particular things on the law. You can always appoint another minister to overlook that.
Like a caretaker minister.
Yeah. So there's no problem at all. It's more about, and also in many cases that you would have the bureaucrats running things on a daily basis. It's just that no one would be able to make important decisions. No driver of major projects, right? But the continued plans can actually go on.
Okay, and then timeline. Where do you think it's all going to happen? Is it 3rd July after Nik Nazmi's notice period ends?
I don't think that Anwar would act on particularly for Nik Nazmi. There's two possibilities. One is somewhere before Hari Merdeka.
Oh, okay.
So if he wants to, then...
Wow, 2 months.
No, before. So I'm saying like any time before that. The reason why I draw that line is like unlikely you're going to have something in between.
Yeah.
Hari Merdeka and Hari Malaysia.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So if it's going to happen, it could be either June or July. Or
so that's one window.
That's one window. The other window that could be actually dragged a little bit later after Sabah state election.
Which is having to be done by October this year.
The Sabah state legislature would stand dissolved by October, which means election would then go all the way December, right? But that's more likely one speculation is that it would be held, the legislature would be dissolved early, immediately after Hari Malaysia.
That's your reading.
That's one of the speculation.
So with these two windows that you have outlined, which is the more likely, in your opinion?
Maybe the earlier one.
The earlier one?
Yeah.
Which is that before Merdeka?
Yeah. And that depends on going back on Sabah, because let's say if GRS strike a deal with the government, that basically you don't have to reflect much on that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to touch the Sabah part.
Yeah.
You just do that. But however, if GRS decide to go head on with the two national blocs in Sabah, PH and BN, that may leave more uncertainty, which means that the Prime Minister can make a decision after the state election.
Okay, let's talk about Sabah politics a little bit more, because considering that maybe not many people would be familiar, you are a Sabahan.
No, I'm not. I'm actually from Perak.
You're from Perak?
I'm Sabahan Aspal.
Oh.
Asli tapi palsu.
Yeah, Aspal. Okay. let's talk about Sabah right now. So what is the likelihood of GRS striking a deal with PHBN? Because prior to the PKR elections, Datuk Sri Zahid Hamidi of UMNO was talking about how he is actually quite open to talk about anybody, including Warisan. And then, of course, PH is now, after the PKR election, Nurul Izzah is hitting the ground running in Sabah, trying to talk to some of the cabang there, trying to see how they can coalesce and maneuver the political machinery there. Much of it is to the chagrin of Rafizi. He was talking about that is rather disrespectful for the party to do so. At that point in time, he was still deputy president. But politics aside, everybody is making overtures, saying that a lot is on the table, and seems like nothing is off the table. So, what is the likelihood of coalitions or relationships and partnerships can be done? What is the likelihood of, say, GRS partnering with PHBN, or just one of them, or both?
Okay, let's go back to the bigger picture. Basically, you have four forces in Sabah. Putting aside PH, which is largely DAP, right, and a bit of PKR, then the other three were brothers from the old UMNO family. UMNO, GRS, and Warisan, right? And what happened the last state election was that GRS and BN, UMNO, they team up, they split the seats. Now, with now all four blocks are in the federal government, the calculation is this: how can each side maximize the number they contest? For PH, it's almost quite fixed. You're not going much bigger. So it mainly is the other three. So whoever get left out would be in trouble. Right? And then, but they would not even mind completely that a settlements that everyone gets something. That just means they all become very small, which is not bad from Putradaya's point of view, because it's much easier to control. But of course, these people wouldn't. So ultimately, I think for all this positioning and gesture, it comes down to seat negotiation.
Okay, so...
And there's something in Anwar's hands, which is bad from the point of democratic governance, is of course the video scandal.
Which MACC is still trying to resolve.
Yeah, and we know that MACC have very different speed and pace that can change according to political circumstances.
Okay, the final two areas I want to explore is on voter palatability, the acceptance of voter reaction towards some of these political maneuverings that will happen, I suppose. Nobody wants to talk about it on air, but everybody's talking about it at the coffee shops. This is the thing that frustrates me, right? Especially getting on the record about who goes where and everything, and timeline and stuff like that. And of course, all of this is rather academic. The only person that can determine all this is the Prime Minister. This is how the thing is in Malaysia. Of course, while he plans to decide to do the political maneuvering, he is also reading the ground and how the ground is going to accept most, if not all, of these decisions. That's the first area. Second area is on how this ties down with the economy, because after all, this show is about the economy, investor relations, investor confidence, political risk, and whether or not this is going to be priced into how foreign investments are going to flow in, reaction towards ASEAN, all that macro stuff. Where do you see these two elements coming in against what we have discussed? Say, for instance, that envoy, the trade envoy that you mentioned, that could be Zafrul's way forward. That's not without precedents. We've seen under the Muhyiddin administration how that has happened before. And such, and how it is working in tandem with the trade minister and so on. So how does these two elements fall into this picture?
I think for voters, a lot of them, especially Madani supporters, are frustrated because what they get is not what they saw. That frustration, if it were to go further, it would likely result in lower turnout. Not necessarily protest vote. I think protest vote is more likely in the case of Indian than Chinese. Chinese voters are unlikely. Many liberals, liberal Malays probably may also just get frustrated. But some may go for Muda or PSM. The small party may not make a difference, except that they could split enough votes for the government to lose seats, right? On UMNO part, the frustration is perhaps something, the dilemma of UMNO supporter is perhaps more of like how to get the party back in a running position for top seats, right? That's tough now because like if UMNO were to join the opposition, they will be at the bottom, the third Malay parties.
Yeah, after PAS and Bersatu.
Exactly. But if they were to stay on forever as peer supporters, peers, junior partner, and given the lesser number of seats that you can run, they wouldn't have a chance to come back.
More of supply and confidence, I suppose.
Yeah. So the other way around is that ultimately, if the parties are clear-minded enough, they might want to strike a deal. That's something big, not likely to happen yet, but as possibility. You might need to change the system a little bit. So allies can actually compete against each other and then form coalition after election. Yeah. That's possible by introducing party list seats, as in Thailand. Yeah. So that's possible. Now come back to, if you don't have anything and the government would act as if just like, I'm in power, what can you do? Like in the case of Teo Beng Hong, you throw in no further actions. Yeah. Ultimately, you might see PAMU, a new party emerged as, well, not a new party, the party has been here for 2-3 elections, right? Yeah. Emerged as the largest party, Parti Aku Malah Sundi. People just don't go out to vote. Back to investor sentiment, I think a lot of things here depends on the external factor. Trump, tariff, and then Israel attacks on Iran. All these things would probably disturb us, but putting all these things aside, I think the economy has been relatively well managed. We have seen Malaysia overtaking Thailand in the influx of tourists. We have seen economic growth benefiting from all this uncertainty. But and the government stability, I think, for the short future is not in question, right? No matter what you talk about, I think it is quite unlikely for this government to collapse. And interestingly, this is where you find that PN is a bit in disarray because the opposition appear to be strong whenever they see a chance that the government can be changed. So that was the case in G15 in the state election. Once that possibility is eliminated, they actually lost a bit of their momentum. And that, of course, you need to give credit to the anti-hopping law put in force in 2022. All these things actually help to keep Anwar in power, but nothing guarantee Anwar or Madani would still be in power after G16. Before G16, I think the economic, political and economic situation are stable.
So, no langkah Sheraton moments. This government is going to stay intact until the next GE.
Yeah.
But once GE is called for, everything is up in the air, and we'll see where the coins land.
And those voters who are unhappy, that's the time they can punish any political parties they want.
Okay, final question. KJ, where do you think, is he going to compete with Astro AWANI on the broadcast angle, or is he going to compete with, you know, some of the politicians at the political level?
I think he have a lot of choices. Of course, that we have rumors earlier say that UMNO may welcome him back. That's, of course, is a possibility. But they also, for me, the larger questions of him returning politics is not if, it's a matter of when. But more importantly is what kind of changes. If he go into UMNO, for example, does it mean that it would help stir UMNO away? Does it mean that it would help to stir UMNO away from being a Najib apologist party, right? Helping UMNO to recapture the Malay middle ground. or he would actually turn out to be parts of Najib supporters, which is quite likely. But if we go in that way, then he will lose his ground. I think the main thing here, given all the political capital he accumulated after keluar sampai sekarang, yeah.
Keluar sampai sekarang.
What would he
KSS.
Yes.
Right. I don't know whether this is relevant, but I guess my final question would be on Rafizi, assuming that, you know, things might not work out. Is he going to start his own party? Is that something? That's not a possibility.
Rafizi is too smart to start his own party because the field is crowded. Given a situation now, without changing the electoral system, any new party go in would just end up contributing deficit to the government coffer, right? So no way. His best chance is actually stay in the party, strike a deal with Anwar, that we go to G16 altogether. You don't kill all my candidates. You leave us a game to play. We wouldn't attack you too far. After elections, then we talk about, you know, what we can do.
Yeah.
Because if Nurul Izzah can deliver, Rafizi would just accept the fact that, you know, that's not your job, right? But if Nurul Izzah cannot deliver, someone else would still come and challenge.
The viable alternative is ever present and ready.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Chin Huat. That was Professor Wong Chin Huat, political scientist of Sunway University. If you've missed out on any part of this interview, just head on to astro.awani.com, look for the economy or look for Ibrahim Sani, and you'll find these kind of content there. In the meantime, do stay tuned for the kind of coverages that we're going to bring over at Astro Awani, because we're going to be bringing much of the conversation to your desktop and mobile devices, and as well as to your TVs. So stay tuned for that. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Catch you in the next one.
GUSME Astro Awani kembali ke Ipoh. Ayo komen jumpa teman di Aeon Mall Kinta City pada 28 dan 29 Jun. Naik taraf perniagaan anda dalam dunia SME bersama penaja utama Unify Business serta rakan strategik kami. Dibawakan oleh penaja utama jelajah jiwa SME, Unify Business, rakan digital pilihan anda.
Stream Walking with Dinosaurs on BBC Earth and win exclusive merchandise with Astro Rewards.
Di era digital, pemasaran bukan hanya tentang penjualan semata-mata. Penceritaan menarik jadi kekuatan dalam membina hubungan perniagaan, tingkat pengetahuan, perkasakan perniagaan anda. Saksikan segmen Jiwa SME dalam program Awani Pagi dan Niaga Awani setiap Isnin hingga Khamis di saluran 501. Dibawakan oleh penaja utama jelajah jiwa SME, Unify Business, rakan digital pilihan anda.
Aksi legasi kini mendominasi. Sepak takraw League kini kembali membara dalam musim penuh aksi yang menggemparkan. Dapatkan tiket anda sekarang. Pelanggan Astro juga boleh memenangi tiket eksklusif di aplikasi My Astro. Jangan lepaskan peluang keemasan ini.
Daulat Tuanku.
Hello and welcome to Agenda AWANI. I'm your host, Fana Shea. Now, today we're joined by young Ukrainians who are in Kuala Lumpur as part of a visit to engage with different sectors from civil society to policymakers. Now, one of the conversations they're keen to have is about the shared experiences between Ukrainians and Palestinians, two peoples navigating war, displacement, and global power dynamics. So here with us in the studio is Jane, Vice President of Liberal Democratic League of Ukraine, LDLU, and Maria, Head of the East of Asia Office, LDLU. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Right. It must be a long journey for you guys to come here, but what brings you to Malaysia and what are you hoping to share or learn during your visit? Let's start with that.
So probably, first of all, apa khabar?
Come on, right?
Salam dari Ukraine. I really prepared. So basically what we are here for is to understand how to bridge Malaysia and Ukraine closer. We want to meet with civil society actors, with politicians, with NGOs and with academia, because we believe that there is a great potential for cooperation and for intercultural dialogue between these two countries.
Right. What about you, Maria? Why is it important for you to have this kind of relationship with, in Southeast Asia, or this kind of conversations in Southeast Asia?
In LDLU, we have this goal to cover countries that not very covered by our diplomatic efforts and by our civil society because of lack of connections. We are so far from each other, but still it's not a reason not to cooperate. I think it's a reason to cooperate even more because despite the fact that we are located on different parts of this world, we have like different probably contexts in some cases, but we already mentioned some similarities and topics that we can discuss together and how we can cooperate. And for us, it's important to establish such kind of connections, to spread our culture, our stories, and to receive and spread among Ukrainians stories from Malaysia and Malaysian culture, because this is how we can make this world better, to know more about each other, become closer with each other.
Right. So in terms of engagement with this part of the country, what have you done so far in terms of LDLU as an organization? What kind of outreach do you do?
We started to work with Malaysia just recently, but we also discovered for ourselves that it's important to involve Southeast Asian stakeholders into cooperation with Ukraine, including Philippines, plus plus East Asian countries like Japan or Korea. And right now we are trying to understand what kind of project can be done to develop particular things in both countries, because we are not here just to ask for help. We are here to establish mutually beneficial cooperation, because Ukraine can offer this type of cooperation, and obviously I think it's probably the best way how to become real friends, how to establish